1, 2, 3, 4. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Yeah, Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour.
Welcome to the Crazy Chester Radio Hour. I'm your host, Andreas Werner, and today's episode is a special one. I'm honored to have the great and multi-talented Mac Gayden as my guest today. Mac's known for his stellar guitar playing on records by Bob Dylan, Linda Ronstadt, Kris Kristofferson, John Hiatt, Tracy Nelson, and J.J. Cale, on whose Crazy Mama he played the incredible wah-wah slide guitar part that influenced a lot of guitar players ever since. I met Mac through our mutual friend, the late great Buzz Cason. Mac and Buzz have been friends since the 60s, or maybe even the late 50s, and they collaborated on a lot of songs and records, and some of the greatest R&B records ever to come out in Nashville, including Robert Knight's immortal song, Everlasting Love, that the two of them co-wrote. I met Mac coming in and out of the Creative Workshop studio, which was Buzz Cason's studio, and we became friends, him and his wife Diane are beautiful people, and he didn't hesitate when I asked him to come on the show, and I'm so glad he did. We recorded our conversation at the Creative Workshop right before the pandemic, when Buzz was still around, and the two of them were working on an album that came out in 2020 called Come Along. It's a really beautiful album that I really love. Since then, Mac has done a couple of really memorable and wonderful shows at the venue here in Nashville called Third and Lindsley, featuring some of his best friends and collaborators. He filmed and recorded the show and turned it into a concert movie with a little help from my good friend Joe Funderburg, our trusted engineer. When you get a chance, make sure to check it out. It's called Mac Gayden Friends Over. But now let's have the man himself talk about his incredible life in music. And I hope you enjoy my conversation with the great, the legendary, the most soulful Mac Gayden. Welcome to the Crazy Chester Radio Hour, Mac. Thank you for being my guest today.
Sorry it took so long to get here.
Well, I'm just glad I got you now. And I know we're going to cover a lot of ground because you've done so much stuff as a guitar player, as a songwriter, as a producer, as an artist. And I know the podcast probably can only cover a little bit, but we'll try to talk about as much as we can. Now, a lot of people are moving to Nashville, but you are actually a Nashville native, and your family has been a significant family in this area for a long time. There's like roads named after your family.
That's right, yeah.
So how was growing up in Nashville? What kind of experience was that for you?
It was real. I grew up actually just about half a mile from here, right up over the hill there. For me, it was like I had no idea that Nashville. As a kid, I had, except for being around Hank Williams Sr. in a hookup, which I was in a hookup with his stepdaughter, Lucretia, and he would pick us up after school on occasion and carry us home in our neighborhood hookup thing. And but that was the only beginnings of me learning that Nashville was music town. I would see him coming home from the studio in his outfit, and he'd be in a white Cadillac. And I think the one that he died in we rode in actually one time.
You have a book out. It's called Missing String Theory. That is very, very fascinating. But one thing that I learned in there, that you actually got exposed to some more African American music through people who work for your family.
Yeah, yes.
Can you tell me a little bit how you got into, how you discovered your love for music and got into, like, I guess, rhythm and blues in a way?
I got into blues through the help that worked at our house, in my grandmother's house too. They would sing to me old gospel tunes all the time to me. And so it just got to be where it was part of my life growing up. And they would take me to the black church every now and then. And I would see how they would testify at the end, end of the sermon. And it would just grow into this crescendo, into this huge ball of energy, And I thought, well, that's what I want, And so when I got into music, I wanted more kind of like hallelujah, spiritual kind of stuff, So that's how it really kind of happened that way. And they would sit up in the church. They would sit up in the balcony. They weren't allowed to sit down with the white folks. So they would sit up in the balcony, and we'd turn around. All those kids would turn around and wave to them, and our parents would smack us. But so we started taking sides early,
Yeah, and one thing that is not as publicly known, I guess, here in Nashville is that Nashville was a rhythm and blues town for a long time.
Yeah, it was.
Not just country like a lot of people might assume, just by not really going deep. And a few years ago, they had a pretty extraordinary exhibit at the Country Music Hall of Fame called Night Train to Nashville, where you and your work was a big part of it too. And I know this is something you've been doing all your life. Now, there were other musicians at that time, I guess, they shared that love with you, like Charlie McCoy and Kenny Buttrey.
Yeah.
When did you first meet some like-minded musicians?
I was on the road with a band, Leon. Can't think of his last name. Leon was his first name. Anyway, I was on the road with him, and they fired me because I tried to get the band to do our own songs. I wanted to write our own original music. And they were touring these different clubs all over the Southeast. And I thought, if we don't start writing our own songs, I can't take this anymore, So anyway, they basically fired me. When I got back to Nashville, I met Charlie, and Charlie said, we need a guitar player. I heard about you. You're a really good rhythm player, and would you come over and audition for the band? So I did that. And that just hooked me up to not only Charlie McCoy, who's at that time very entrenched in a lot of session work and recording with a lot of people, but also it upped my income quite a bit. And so it was a great day for me to meet Charlie. And so Charlie introduced me to all these people that he was hanging around. On the weekends we played R&B. We had a horn section and everything. And Charlie was, the kind of the quarterback of that whole thing. He called the shots, did the singing, played all the instruments, and did just about everything and organized it. We would go places like, we would play some gigs and we wouldn't even have rehearsed a song. I remember Reach Out, I'll Be There by the Four Tops. We rehearsed that by mouth in the car on the way to the gig and played it note for note. That's the kind of quarterback Charlie was. He was incredible. Yeah.
That was great, and it also says a lot that all the guys in the band have that, common ground that they can discover.
Yeah.
So, and you ended up cutting some 45s for Monument.
Yeah.
And on one of them was a song which is my favorite recording of Charlie McCoy and the Escort. And it's a song that you wrote, Screaming, Shouting, Begging, Pleading.
Yes.
And tell me a little bit about that song, and because it got recorded again by another artist too.
Fabulettes, and produced by, at that time, Ray Stevens. Yeah, Charlie had our band, he called it Charlie McCoy and the Escorts. we cut our own little singles all the time, and every now and then one would get out on the label somewhere, and somebody's working on trying to get a little of that documented now and out to the public maybe. But we cut some really good singles, you know. And one of them we cut, Charlie liked Screaming and Shouting, Begging and Pleading. And I've recently produced that on a girl named Olivia Jones. And it's kind of a very extremely good cut. I think it was on the internet recently.
Yeah, it's interesting how some songs sometimes get this interesting afterlife too. You might not think in the beginning,
Yeah.
but now, and you have more of those songs too, and we'll talk about that later. But was Charlie your introduction into recording studios here in Nashville, or how did you become a session guy?
There was a studio downtown called Globe Studio or something like that, down on Broadway, down near the Opry, right behind, in the alley behind the Opry. And they did cover tunes. They would cover the hits, and sometimes they would do these tunes that people would mail in and want someone to do a demo for them. And we got paid by the song. We would get paid like $15, $20 per song. Sometimes we'd do 30 songs a day, you know. And we had these endings 1 through 5 and beginnings, intros 1 through 5. And it sped the process up. So intro number 1, everybody knew what it was. So it would speed the whole process up. And sometimes we'd do 30 tunes a day. And so I got into doing that first. I played even some bass, and got into knowing the ins and outs of bass playing, and it really helped me a lot as a producer later on down the road. But that was my start, and we cut everything from country to R&B to Broadway tunes, classical, everything, you name it, we did it, you know, barroom stuff.
So that was a pretty good education.
Oh, it's fantastic, yeah.
Did you meet Buzz Kaysen around the same time?
I sure did, yeah. Buzz and I kind of ran in similar circles. He was on the road with Brenda Lee a lot, but I would run into Buzz every now and then, and I was a big fan of the Casuals because I'd see him play every now and then. Didn't see them enough because they were out of town a lot. But Buzz and I just kind of, I guess, societal osmosis. We met each other. He lived in Madison, and I lived over in South Nashville here, and we kind of ran into each other. And I think Bobby Russell was also a friend of Buzz's, and he and I were good friends, and I think Bobby was the one who kind of hooked us up.
Yeah, and you ended up being connected with many of the great rhythm and blues singers here in Nashville. One of them was Clifford Curry, and you wrote with Chuck Neese, Clifford's biggest hit, She Shot a Hole in My Soul. How did you meet Clifford, and how did you get that song to him? Did you write that for him specifically, or is that something you just had ready?
Rob Galbraith, who's a DJ from Knoxville, a DJ with the university station, I think. Anyway, he kind of managed Clifford. He brought Clifford to town, and I already had that song written. Charlie had done it. He did the demo for me. He sang it, and I played on it. And so we just played it for Buzz and Clifford, and they loved the song, and one thing led to another, and it happened. You know, it was one of those things that we weren't predicting. It was just, we knew it was kind of an interesting kind of song. We took it out of a 4-beat kind of thing and put it into a shuffle, and it worked perfectly. And put horns, kind of Memphis-type horns on it, you know.
Yeah.
Muscle Shoals, Memphis.
Yeah. And, you know, one of probably your biggest, most signature song is Everlasting Love, that got first recorded by Robert Knight.
Yeah.
And I believe, you know, by listening to you and reading your book, Everlasting Love grew out of 2 melodies you've been carrying around for a long time, going back to your childhood almost.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit how that
Give
song...
me that guitar and I'll show you something. There was a song I had a hit on by Bobby Bear called It's All Right. And it went like this. It's all right. See that chord right there? In the Everlasting Love. Same chord. Oh, open up your eyes. It's the same chord. So I, for some reason, had that chord around for a long time. And then this repetitive chorus. Goes, open up your eyes, then you realize, here I stand with my everlasting. This da 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 da. I had that for a long time against those chords. And then this part. Da 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 da. That was from when I was 5 years old. That melody there. Wrote that on the piano.
Okay.
Yeah. Da, 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 da. It's very simple.
Yeah.
And the I think the verse chords, maybe Buzz and I came up with that together. I can't remember. Buzz and I can't remember exactly what happened back in those days. There's so many songs that we wrote.
Absolutely. And also, I guess the fact that it became a hit was almost a little bit of a coincidence, because if I don't got this wrong, is I guess there were already 3 songs earmarked for that Robert Knight session, but you were in need of a 4th one for the session.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why that song got completed for that particular session.
That's right, yeah.
But then I guess popular demand turned it into the hit.
Yeah. It was one of those things no one predicted, you know. Most hits people don't, you know, except sometimes nowadays when they're going to buy the record to the top, you know. People kind of know it's going to be a hit. If it's a big artist and they know they're going to buy it to the top, which they do, you know.
And over the course of many years, the song got recorded by many different artists, including Gloria Estefan,
U2,
U2, Carlton, many people, and many people had hits with it. And I know, I mean, there's not a week that goes by where somewhere on a radio station or somewhere in a store I hear Everlasting Love. It's just one of those few songs that I just became the soundtrack of a whole era, I guess.
Yeah, I didn't realize the impact of it until I went to Europe on tour one time. People came up and told me that they got married to it, and they were crying, and it really moved me. I couldn't believe it influenced that many people, you know, worldwide.
Yeah. So after you doing a lot of rhythm and blues stuff, and Nashville kind of entering a different era, I guess, in the mid-'60s, when a lot of artists from all over the place came to town to record and wanted to get some of that sound that you guys were able to conceive in the recording studio, including Bob Dylan came in to cut Blonde on Blonde and a couple other albums, and you were part of those sessions too. Is that, looking back, is that a particular session that stands out to you, or is that just, you know, you worked so much, is that just another session that went by quick?
Well, for us who played on it, it was just another session. No one knew at the time the significance of Bob Dylan coming to Nashville. They just didn't know, you know. We had a hard time getting Charlie to like Bob Dylan, because we had been turned on to him by some college friends a long time before he came here, and we played him for Charlie, and Charlie couldn't stand his harp playing. And of course, Charlie being the best harp player in the world, very discriminate, you know, but and very picky. But for some reason, fate moved Charlie into the right position up in New York one day, and he went over and sat in a session with Bob Johnson doing Dylan. I don't know which album that was. But anyway, Charlie got to know Dylan, loved what he was doing. They all came to Nashville, and the rest was history. Yeah.
And you mentioned Bob Johnson, who not only produced Dylan, but he also ended up producing one of your albums here in Nashville. How did that come out of doing session work for him, or how did that came about?
I don't know. I think Bob Johnson heard that I was leaving Barefoot Jerry, and I was looking for, a label, and so he got me signed with EMI, and that album came out in Europe only because, for some reason, this is a strange thing to happen. I've had the worst luck with kind of the inner workings of different labels when I signed. That was on EMI, which is a part of Capitol. Well, Capitol also had Barefoot Jerry, so when I left Barefoot Jerry, they didn't want to promote my record in Europe. I mean, in the United States, so they wouldn't put it out. So they put it out in Europe only. And the head of EMI said it was the best record they put out the whole year. And it did a little bit over in Europe, but not as much as it could have done here. Called McGavock Gayden.
Yeah. So, I guess peeling back a little bit, one other signature session, I guess, looking back, was when you played for J.J. Cale, and you played a wah slide, which I guess prior to that nobody's ever really done that. How did you discover that effect? Because it's still like the Mac Gayden signature guitar effect.
I was keeping that as a secret for Barefoot Jerry, which I played the whole first Barefoot Jerry album. I played wah slide. And I was really keeping it a secret, and but I was not feeling good one day, and John, I call him John Cale, J.J, called me one day and says, "I want you to come out and overdub on the song I played for you over at one of the publishing companies the other day." And it said it's a Jimmy Reed type tune. And so I said, "I'll be out in a little bit. I'm not feeling good, so I won't be in the studio too long, will I?" And he said, you won't be in there too long. So I'll go out there, and I'm running 103-degree temperature. And I set up, and I said, "Run the tune for me," and they ran it. And I said, "Okay, now let's cut it." And they said, "We already cut it." They ran it on the rundown. They cut it. So that's the first take. And so I got up and left. Had no idea that I cut on his first hit. Yeah.
The secret was out after that.
Yeah.
Crazy Mama.
Yeah.
Now still a lot of people cover it.
Yeah.
I've seen you perform it too in
Yeah.
your solo set. Now, a group of you guys, session musicians, also, and that's pre-Barefoot Jerry, like you and Norbert Putnam, Jerry Kerrigan, Kenny Buttrey. When did you all decide, well, maybe we should start a band and cut a couple records on our own as Area Code?
I think Elliot Mazur and Kenny Buttrey came up with that idea. I think it was all their kind of brainchild. And of course, they got Charlie first. Charlie became like the go-to man there, and he called all the shots in terms of like arrangements a little bit, and so on and so. It was very easy because you got 9 skilled session musicians who are really complete in their own right, and then get into the studio with those guys, and you have no problem. The only problem they had was like there was some of us smoking marijuana, and some of us were against it, and were drinkers, and occasionally an empty beer can would fly across the room, but that was about it.
And that band, and then later Barefoot Jerry,
Yeah.
they became hugely influential for other musicians. It's some of those bands and records that a lot of musicians quote and say, "Well, I listened to those records, and those records influenced me."
Yeah.
It's interesting too. A lot of time, I think, even in regard to the conception of what they call Southern rock, they quote your bands, saying, "Hey, these bands were very influential at kind of creating a sound that moved away from country into a little bit more of a rock territory." I guess.
Yeah, we were kind of experimenting with a little bit of rock, but there were a couple of guys in the band who were more into bluegrass, so that band didn't last 2 albums. And mainly the reason was those guys were making so much money as session players. I wasn't. I was making half what they were making, which wasn't bad, but not as much as they were. And they didn't want to travel, so they put an end to that band. We could have done incredible things as a band,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Did you decide to do Barefoot Jerry after that band didn't work out?
Yes, I did. We all decided that we loved playing for the hippies, and the hippies loved us. So we wanted to experience that. And so, some of the other guys didn't want to travel, and the rest of us started Barefoot Jerry.
And a 4-piece probably
Yeah.
a little easier to manage than
Yeah,
8
That's right.
too. So between session work and band work, you must have been really busy. And you mentioned that some of the other guys didn't necessarily, want to hit the road because they already got their work.
Yeah, Kenny left Barefoot Jerry because of that. He was just working so much. He was making, maybe 250,000, 300,000 a year, and back then it was a lot of money, So he didn't want to leave, and Charlie really didn't want to leave either. So he ended up being John Harris, who's a doctor friend of ours, played piano, and Kenny in the original group, and then Wayne Moss and myself.
Yeah. And then after that, you started, and we mentioned the Bob Johnson produced album before, but you recorded 3 albums like during the end of the 70s,
Yes,
and then another one more recently.
Yes.
But which leads me to one of my favorite songs of yours is Morning Glory.
Yes.
That ended up on the album that you and Buzz did together.
That's right.
And then after that, it got recorded by James and Bobby Purify,
Oh.
and they did a great version on it too.
Yeah, they did, yeah.
So, do you remember anything about the creation of that song?
Yes, I do. And by the way, it was cut. I was sitting about 3 feet away from where you're sitting, where I would overdub the guitar part. Anyway, I was writing that song, and I wrote it, and my daughter Kimberly memorized it, taught it to her school friends. So coming home from school, we were living out in the country, near Dixon. And coming home from school one day, I was sitting on the front porch, and about 75 yards from the house was the end of the driveway, and I heard all these kids with their heads stuck out the bus window singing Morning Glory. So I was just really stoked, And I told Diane, my wife, that at that time I said, I've got to go in and record this, and that's how it happened. So it was a very spiritual experience that I had that made me write the song, other than just the kids singing it.
Yeah. That was like, the song got road tested before you ever got to record
That's
it.
right.
So that was great.
Yeah.
Another one of your favorite collaborators, if I might say so, you produced at the same time, and that's Diane Davidson.
Yes.
You did some great recordings with her, and I know you still occasionally perform with her too.
Yes, I do.
How was producing her? How did you meet her, and how did that lead to you guys collaborating?
Speaking of that album, it's coming out again. They're re-releasing it.
Oh, that's
Just
great.
saw it on the internet yesterday. I think Audie Ashworth, who was a DJ and a producer here in town, who had the publishing on Crazy Mama and all the J.J. Cale stuff, had met her, and she was writing for his company, and he introduced me to her, and we hooked up. And as far as 2 artists getting together and collaborating on songs and stuff like that, and we wrote some songs together. And one thing led to another, and we cut that first album. It was called Baby by Diane Davidson, which is a really incredible album. Some major good stuff on there. Arrangements by Bob Holmes, one of the best arrangements I ever heard in Nashville on that song called Trying Times. If you ever get a chance, listen to Trying Times by Diane Davidson. It's just one of the best string arrangements I've ever heard in Nashville.
And I think around the same time you also produced Steve Young.
Yes.
And how did that come about?
Steve was into Zen Buddhism, and I was into different kinds of metaphysics myself, and studied it in college a lot. So I was open to anyone who had questions about all that stuff and the metaphysics. And one day we had lunch together and talked about all that, one thing led to another, and he became a big fan of mine and me of him, and he asked me to produce that album, so I did.
Yeah, so you actually had something in common before you even made music together.
Oh yes.
And I guess that leads me to, your spiritual side is something that's very, very much a part of you and very important to you. You outline it in detail in your book. But how did you discover this side of yours and got into transcendental meditation and all that whole world, which, without wanting to be stereotypical, you don't necessarily expect that from a southern boy.
Yeah.
But that's where your path led you.
Well, when I was a kid, 9 years old in grammar school, I had an out-of-the-body, what they call a near-death experience. I broke my back on the schoolyard ground, and was out of the body for maybe an hour and a half. By the time I got to the hospital, I went back in the body, But by the time I got to the hospital, I went back in through my head. I was out of the body for maybe an hour and a half, My dad was a doctor, and he was home from the hospital that day, and they called him, and just by chance he came rushing to the schoolyard ground and picked me up, put me and beat the ambulance there. We were kind of living out in the country at that time. And so that experience changed me. And anyone who's ever had a near-death experience or out-of-body experience, it changes you a little bit, especially near death. And it took me quite a few years to really get my bearings in my body again. I had a hard time, so I had to do a lot of searching and reading and exploring and different kind of metaphysical realm, because with the experience I had, my preacher couldn't tell me about it. I asked him; he would talk to me about it, and so I sought the answers elsewhere, which actually wasn't a confrontational thing with my Christian upbringing. It was actually made it stronger, So the transcendental thing to me is everything, spans all boundaries.
Yeah, and some of that concept also found its way into your music.
Yes.
In songs like The Seekers,
Yes.
So was that for you kind of I guess, songwriters write about their experiences, and
Yes.
that was you doing that.
I kind of drop little hints here and there in my songs. I don't try to make it too overly dramatic, but I just drop little hints of things every now and then. It might be I was reading an Indian poem once, and this Indian sage said, "I'll drop little nuggets of nectar along the path, and you just follow them."
Yeah.
Of pollen, rather. He didn't say nectar, he said pollen. Drop little nuggets of pollen along the way.
Yeah. So it feels like your career in music in different ways has some full circle elements to it too. For example, you got started in rhythm and blues, and then that might have faded a little bit from what you were doing for a while, but then with that Country Music Hall of Fame exhibit, Night Train to Nashville, and more recently you reuniting with the Valentines to cut a record and do a documentary, who were, was an R&B group you worked with in the 60s.
Yes.
But it's kind of one of those full circle moments, and I believe if I get this right, is you had a bunch of songs that you had ready or you completed for the Valentines when they reunited and got in the studio with you.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that project. And
it's still kind of on hold right now because we're doing the documentary, and it's quite expensive, so we're just kind of waiting till we have more funds to finish it. It's because I want to really do it right. I don't want to do it halfway, you know.
So the recording side of things.
The recording is done. The record's done, but the the logistics of, as far as editing and all that are still in the making.
Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing that once it's completed.
It'll be good. It'll be interesting anyway.
Yeah. So another one of those full circle moments is you wrote Everlasting Love with Buzz Kaysen. You worked with him a lot in the 60s and the 70s. And more recently, not as much. I mean, you played on one of his records here and there, and obviously you've remained friends over the years. But very recently, the two of you decided to collaborate on new music together. How did that come about, and can you tell us a little bit about the project you're working on?
I think Buzz has kind of mentioned over the years he wanted to work together again, off and on. And I've been kind of lazy about it, you know, not taking it that serious. I didn't really want to get back into my artist thing. It's been about 7 years since I've done an album. I kind of wanted to put that on the back burner, or just abandon it, you know. And so one day, Buzz said, "Let's get serious. Let's do some music." And I decided, okay, it's time. And the things are so weird in the world right now, and so weird musically. I thought, heck, they need some of my music right now, in the smallest kind of way, even, you know. So Buzz and I we're rosin up the boat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You pretty much get together once a week to go through material and,
Yes.
and write.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of, things happening right now. You also mentioned Olivia Jones a little bit earlier. You produced some music on her more recently
Yes.
too. And she is, a great singer in her own right. And is that something that keeps you interested too, working with a younger generations of musicians? Because I know several of your kids are great musicians and artists in their own right.
Yeah.
Working with your daughter and with your son, that must keep you, young and
Connected.
yeah.
It does. Working with your kids is an amazing experience, because I don't look at them as my kids. It's kind of like they're my sister and brother, you know. And that's the way they approach it too. So it's kind of, we're just sisters and brothers, you know. And they don't get into the father-son kind of thing with me too much. I've always asked them not to do that. And so it's a lot more productive, you know, because they come to the writing sessions with a lot of maturity and it displayed, you know.
Yeah. Them growing up, did you actively push them to become musical, or is that something that they discovered on their own, or is it something you almost wanted to prevent them from happening? Because I didn't.
I tell you, I told them all in the very beginning, get a major profession. Don't do music as a profession, as your main profession. Get it as a secondary, and that's what they both did, those two. And it's the best advice I ever gave them, because the music business, as we know, is royalties are concerned, are in decline, and they're both doing extremely well in their professions. So, one's a CPA, and my son's a CPA, and my daughter Oshina is a principal at a high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they still find the time to create music with you.
Oh yeah, we have fun. You know, we enjoy it a lot. It's just that they understand their limitations for them. You know, they have kids and stuff. You know.
Yeah. Now, over the past 45 minutes, we talked about a lot of different projects and a lot of things you've accomplished over the years. Is there anything like any project, any record, anything that means a lot to you or is one of your favorites, but maybe not as well known to the public? Is there like a record somewhere where it's like, well, this is my favorite record I ever produced, but it's not necessarily one that a lot of people know about, or a favorite session that sticks out?
Well, the Charlie McCoy catalog, Charlie McCoy and the Escorts catalog, is one of my favorites, because it's so real, And out of all the records, hit records that we played on as a group, it's just an enormous amount of energy we put into other people, And I would love to see Charlie and the Escorts get their due,
Yeah.
So I got a friend of mine who's working on that, so.
Yeah, that would be great, because a lot of those, I guess, after they came out on 45s, they haven't really quite made it to the present as much as maybe some older records like Everlasting Love or She Shot a Hole in My Soul.
Yeah.
And Charlie is a great singer too. You would never think, you look at him and he's this, kind of, short white guy, but then he sings those songs and he sounds like a black man.
He's definitely a very interesting dude, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, Mac, thank you so much for spending this time with me here and sharing all these great stories and memories. And I just want to wish you the best of luck with the upcoming projects and the best of health. And thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you, Andreas. I really love doing this. I've been looking forward to it.
Thank you. And that was my conversation with Mac Gayden. If you get a chance, check out his albums, including his most recent one, Come Along. They are full of wonderful musical moments, great playing, and great songs. And also, if there's ever a chance for you to see his concert movie, Friends Over, do yourself a favor and check it out. It's really beautiful. So, and if you like today's podcast, you may also want to check out some of our earlier episodes, including some of Buzz's cohorts, Buzz Kaysen and Rob Galbraith, along Billy Swan, Bruce Chanel, and a lot of Muscle Shoals session cats. Please subscribe to or like the Crazy Chester Radio Hour wherever you listen to podcasts. And stay healthy, stay happy, and I hope to catch you again next time. The Crazy Chester Radio Hour was created and produced by me, Andreas Werner, producer, songwriter, composer for the Muscle Shoals Heart. The theme song is performed by Jimmy Hall of Wet Willie and the Funky Chester Rhythm Section. It was recorded at Creative Workshop Studio in Nashville, Tennessee. You can find out more about the podcast and myself at crazychesterrecords.com or on Instagram at crazychesterrecords.